One of the most underrated cloned coasters out there is the giant inverted Boomerang. There are only two operating in America at the moment. That is Aftershock at Silverwood and Goliath at Six Flags New England. But you can find a couple others around the world, including one in Russia. I've done one in Spain called Stuntfall. That's at Park Warner. Many will remember these rides from the Six Flags Ride Rotation program, where you had one at Six Flags Over Georgia, Magic Mountain, Six Flags Great America. And you know, the concept of a cloned coaster often gets a lot of hate. People would much rather just have original rides. I mean, we always look to the Vekoma SLCs and Boomerangs as like the epitome of what a bad cloned coaster could be. But this is one clone that I never mind riding because it is so good. Giant inverted Boomerangs are smooth, intense, and packed full of some wild maneuvers. So this is going to be my full in-depth review of the attraction, but I'm specifically going to be focusing on Aftershock at Silverwood and Stuntfall at Park Warner. I'm mostly going to be ignoring Goliath at Six Flags New England because that's kind of the oddball out here. It runs with premier trains instead of the traditional Vekoma ones, and unfortunately, it pretty much ruins the ride. That was the first giant inverted Boomerang I did, and I did not have a very high opinion of them. It wasn't until I did Stuntfall at Park Warner that I realized, whoa, this is actually really good. That was my favorite ride there, and I couldn't wait to do Aftershock, and it absolutely delivered. But what makes these rides so good? Let's start by running through the stats here. We have a height of 192 feet. These rides are tall. There are two massive towers that the ride brings you up backwards, lets you go, and then you hit the second one facing the sky, and it drops you down to go through the layout all over again. You only drop from about 177 feet up, but naturally, if you're sitting in the back row for that first tower, it feels like you're falling more than if you were in the front, and then the opposite can be said when you are going backwards. Oh, and by the way, that's a vertical descent. Plunging straight down to the ground on these things is wild. I mean, these rides are intimidating enough, but when you have a vertical drop on a shuttle coaster, it adds to the intimidation factor, and I think the same can be said for a ride like Mr. Freeze. That has a very intimidating spike. So in that regard, I think the Mr. Freeze clones and the giant inverted Boomerangs actually share quite a bit in common. They're both super intense, underrated experiences, and I can't get enough of them. Your top speed on the giant inverted Boomerangs is 66 miles per hour. You have a total of 3 inversions, but you traverse that course twice, so you actually go upside down 6 times, and it's just over 1,000 feet of track. There's not a lot to it, but it feels like a long ride because of the way it's structured. Now, one of the more interesting things about this ride is the way that the traditional trains are set up. They're staggered seating 4 across. So like on your Vekoma SLCs and Boomerangs where you just have 2 across seating, this actually goes for a 4 across width, but you have 2 in the center of the track forwards, and then 2 staggered back a little bit on the ends. Those end seats end up being pretty wild. It's going to be a bit more of an aggressive experience because when you go around one of those elements, the ride pulls you just a little bit further than one of the seats in the center. And it's interesting talking to people about whether they prefer one of the end seats or the center seats. I've heard it both ways. I know some people where their favorite row is back right, and others prefer a front row right in the middle. It's tough to say. Definitely give this ride a couple tries in a few different rows because you will be able to notice the difference. Now, one of my absolute favorite things about this ride is the pacing. And you know, the same thing can be said for general Boomerangs. It's such a compact ride that it whips you from one element to the next. But I think just because this ride is on a much larger scale, it feels all the more out of control. And really, that's the way I describe this ride, is it feels like a bucking bronco that when you hit that final brake run, you're done. You have to take a breather. You're like, holy cow, that was a lot to handle. I don't know if the same can be said for a normal Boomerang. I mean, oftentimes if you feel like you need to sit down after you get off a regular Boomerang, it's not because of the layout, it's just because the thing was rough, gave you some head banging, and yeah, you feel like you need to sit down after that. I don't really feel like that's the case here. I mean, you do have these fairly large over-the-shoulder restraints, and they'll tell you to keep your head back when you ride this thing, but don't do that. Keep your head forward. It helps you brace for the maneuvers, and that way you are not banging your head against the restraint. When you do that, you realize that these rides are actually very smooth, which is why I hate those premier trains on Goliath at Six Flags New England because it actually ruins the ride. For the most part, you still have the same pacing, but those trains just are not the same. When I first did Stuntfall, I was so impressed how good the ride was. Even though I had done Six Flags New England, I was like, I have to do this one again. I mean, this was my favorite ride at that park, and it's a clone. It's my favorite ride at Silverwood, and it's a clone. I have the same philosophy with these as I do the Raptors. Put them everywhere. I think that it's a beautiful looking ride, especially Aftershock at Silverwood. With the mountain backdrops and all the greenery in that park, the colors just pop on it. It's such a cool looking ride. I love looking at it dead on because that cobra roll forms the shape of a heart. And I know I made this joke on Instagram already, so they heard it it first, but it's like Vekoma knew how much we love this thing, so they made the element in the shape of a heart. I mean, it's silly to think about, but it's true. These rides are really, really good, guys. If you haven't been on one already, I highly recommend it. For its final score, I mean, I'm giving it a 10 out of 10. I don't have any complaints about this thing. As far as shuttle coasters go and cloned layouts, this is easily one of the best. But I want to hear from you guys if you agree with my thoughts. If you think I missed anything, be sure to let me know down in the comments below. And of course, stay tuned for more coaster reviews here at Coaster Studios, and I'll see you next time.